Warren.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we turn now to the West Memphis Three, a new film looking at the case of the three young men in West Memphis, Arkansas, who were imprisoned for the 1993 slayings of three 8-year-old boys after an investigation largely fueled by unsubstantiated rumors of a satanic ritual. The documentary, called West of Memphis, was co-produced by none other than one of the convicted youths at the heart of the story, Damien Echols. Echols was released last August after spending nearly 2 decades in prison, all the while proclaiming his innocence. He and his co-defendants, Jason Baldwin and Jesse Miskelly Jr., accepted a bargain known as an Alford plea, in which they could continue to maintain their innocence but plead guilty in exchange for an 18-year sentence and credit for time served. Prosecutors declared it a closed case after the hastily called court hearing in Jonesboro, Arkansas. At the time, 2 of the men had been sentenced to life. Echols was on death row. The West Memphis Three were teenagers back in '94 when they were convicted for the murders of 8-year-old Cub Scouts Stephen Branch, Christopher Byers, and James Michael Moore. At the time, police called the murder satanic because the children's naked bodies had been bound and apparently mutilated. However, recent DNA tests did not link the young men to the scene and showed the presence of others who have never been identified. And the new documentary, West of Memphis, suggests the 3 young boys were never mutilated, but preyed on post-mortem by snapping turtles commonly found in the Arkansas-Tennessee border town. Over the years, the West Memphis Three case became a cause célèbre, with critics arguing the men were unjustly targeted. Among those who championed their cause were celebrities like Pearl Jam's Eddie Vedder and Dixie Chicks singer Natalie Maines. Award-winning director Joe Berlinger first sparked an international movement to free the West Memphis Three through his documentaries Paradise Lost, The Child Murders at Robin Hood Hills. The story continues to capture filmmakers' attention years after the now Oscar winner Colin Firth and actress Reese Witherspoon have announced they will star in a movie called The Devil's Knot, the first narrative feature concerning the complicated yet fascinating subject of the West Memphis Three. Well, Democracy Now! Recently got a chance to sit down with Damien Echols, talk about the documentary he co-produced, West of Memphis, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in Park City, Utah, the largest independent film showcase in the country. I also spoke with Damien's wife, Lorri Davis, and the film director, Amy Berg. I began by asking Damien Echols how it felt to be free after nearly 18 years in prison.
Whenever I first got out, I was in a state of extreme shock and trauma. You know, you would think you would just be happy, but it's really psychologically devastating, just because I had been in prison for over 18 years. I'd been in solitary confinement for almost 10 years, and then really all at once I was just thrown out into the world again, and it shakes you. So for me, the past 5 months has just been a process of slowly coming out of that state of shock and sort of trying to just adapt and adjust to life as normal people live it.
You were on death row for how many years?
I was on death row for 17 years. I sat in jail for a year waiting to go to trial, so 18 years altogether.
Death row?
Yes.
Were you preparing to die?
I don't think so. I think some part of me always had faith that this would work out. I didn't have any faith in the justice system because I had seen how corrupt it was all the way to the core from the inside, and that completely took away any faith I had in the system whatsoever. What I did have faith in was all the people that came to our aid, you know, the supporters and the investigators and everybody that rallied around us. That's what I had faith in, and that's why I believed I would eventually get out.
You certainly didn't have that at the beginning when you were first picked up. Can you talk about what was going through your mind in those days?
I was very young and very naive. I didn't have any experience with the system. I didn't understand how corrupt it was. And in my mind at the time, you know, whenever we were going through the trial and everything else, I thought, it's physically impossible for them to prove you've done something you haven't done. Therefore, I don't really have anything to worry about. And that's sort of the mind frame that I had at the time.
Amy Berg, in your film West of Memphis, you present a very convincing picture at the beginning that, well, these 3 young men were probably guilty, and you just lay it out there as everyone saw it in the town. And you have this moment where you show this smile, almost sneer, of Damien. Talk about that, and I wanted Damien to also then talk about that when he sees that today.
Well, we felt it's a very challenging story to tell, and it's 2.5 hours already, and we had over 800 hours of footage. I mean, this was a very intense investigation that was going on for 2 years on the ground. So the idea that we needed to take the audience through how these guys were convicted was basically put into place, and so that's why the first act is being told like that. Now, of course, it was Damien obviously is a producer on the film, and he's had tremendous input in the film, and I wasn't sure how he would feel about that. So when he can tell you how he...
I think it was really, really good, just because it sort of spoke to the mind frame, and it sort of referenced how everything was in '93 at the time of the trials.
You were how old?
I was 18 or 19 when the trial started.
Do you remember this moment?
Yes, I do. And the reason I thought it was so perfect is because at that moment, all I'm actually doing is smiling at my family who's standing outside the car. But the media at the time would take something like that and twist it and manipulate it and try to make it look like something else. And I think the way Amy has it in the film, it shows exactly how they were doing it at the time.
Mm-hmm. Lorri, when did you first make contact with Damien?
In 1996. After I saw Paradise Lost at MoMA, New Directors New Films series.
And where were you?
I was living in New York at the time. And
so what did you do?
Well, you know, I was strangely affected by the film. I mean, I grew up in the South, so I mean, I understood the mindset of the people, but I also understood the mindset of Damien, because I grew up that kind of kid too, sort of strident and I wasn't visibly stand out in the community, but kind of always interested in other things. And so I felt compelled to help him in some way, and I didn't know what to do. You know, I mean, this isn't something I had never had any experience in anything like this, so the only thing I could think to do was write to him and see what I could do to help. And there wasn't that much information available about the case at the time, because the internet was fledgling, and, you know, case files, all of that was in Arkansas. And even once I got to Arkansas, it was hard to find that information, even in 1998, because you had to go to the courtroom and all that. So we started a correspondence. And
were you getting many letters at the time, Damien?
Quite a few, just because of the release of the initial documentaries and news coverage and stuff like that. So I was getting quite a few at the time, but from the very first one I got from Lorri, or the first one I received from Lorri, I knew immediately that she was completely and absolutely unlike anyone else that I'd ever known in my life. And I mean, from that very first moment, all I wanted was more.
And so, Lorri, when did you move south?
2 years later.
When did you first meet?
We met in August. In person, we met. I would travel back and forth from New York, so I met him in August of 1996.
And talk about the beginning of the investigation you were attempting to do very much on your own.
Yeah. Well, when I got to Arkansas, nothing was happening in the case, and he had a pro bono attorney who was not really that hands-on, not really putting that much into the case at the time, and and I was trying to catch up on everything and learn what had happened. And then we were in the throes of the Rule 37 hearings, which you're trying to prove ineffective counsel. So I had no idea what I was doing, what goes into an ineffective counsel plea. It didn't seem at that time, and I don't mean disrespect, but it just seemed to me that none of the attorneys who were working on the case knew what was to go into an ineffective, counsel, a plea. So we spent 8 years almost, I think, working on that back and forth, because the state was stalling. But I really was I was playing catch up so much, and we didn't have any money, and so it became this, and I'm not saying I was a one-woman show, because there were other people out in California, WM3.org, who were helping me raise funds, but at that time there really weren't that many people around who I could call upon for help. But suddenly in 1999, the documentary was being viewed by different people, and so I was contacted by you know, Eddie Vedder and Johnny Depp and people who were willing to come on board to help at least with funding. But as I really did learn, and I was told early on, funding's not going to be your problem, and it wasn't. We would get the funding. It was getting the expertise and getting the drive and getting structure and building the legal team, and that didn't happen until Fran and Pete came on board.
And explain who Fran and Pete are.
I'm sorry. Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh contacted me in 2005, and that, I mean, you think about that, from 1999 or 1998 to 2005, and we were just floundering.
We'll continue the interview with Lorri Davis, who married Damien Echols in jail. He spent close to half his life on death row. They are producers of a new film called West of Memphis. We'll also continue with director Amy Berg. Stay with us.